A person takes a tablet, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and for the next hours, their sense of self disintegrates. The boundary between them and the rest of the world dissolves. They're not experiencing the world anymore. They're part of the world. They feel connected to everything. The individual I that normally seems so solid, so foundational, is revealed to be an illusion. It's a construction. It can be deconstructed. And when it dissolves, what emerges is a kind of peace, a sense of meaning, a dissolution into something larger. But there's another person. They take a different drug, cocaine, methamphetamine, opioids, and also their sense of self disintegrates, but in a different direction. The drug triggers the reward system. Dopamine floods the nucleus accumbens. The person feels extraordinary pleasure, euphoria. For a moment, they're alive in a way they've never been. But then the drug wears off. The dopamine plummets. The person feels empty, hollow, dead inside. So they take more and more. And the disintegration of self is not transcendent. It's compulsive. It's addiction. This is the psychology of drugs and psychedelic trips. Not a simple story of chemicals affecting the brain, but a complex tale of how altered states reveal something profound about the nature of consciousness, the structure of self, and the vulnerability of human minds. Watch what happens when the neural systems that construct reality are deliberately disrupted. The first psychological mechanism is what researchers call the default mode network, or DMN. This is a network of brain regions that activate when you're not focused on the external environment. It's the brain's self-referential system. It's constantly asking, what does this mean for me? How does this relate to my goals? Who am I in relation to this? The DMN constructs the sense of a continuous self moving through time. It's the basis of ego. Psychedelic drugs like psilocybin and LSD bind to serotonin 2A receptors. These receptors are located at the apex of the cortical hierarchy. They're particularly concentrated in areas of the brain involved in higher-order cognition. When psychedelics activate these receptors, they disrupt the normal functioning of the default mode network. The hierarchical flow of information from higher regions to lower regions gets disrupted. The brain's ability to construct a unified sense of self is impaired. The result is ego dissolution. The sense of self that normally feels continuous and unified breaks apart. The boundary between self and world, which normally feels like a clear line, becomes permeable. People report feeling merged with their surroundings, feeling that the distinction between me and not me is arbitrary. The profound weirdness of this experience is that it feels like truth. It feels like the dissolution of a false boundary. The second mechanism is what researchers call the relaxed beliefs under psychedelics model, or REBUS. This model proposes that psychedelics work by relaxing the brain's core beliefs about reality. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It generates predictions about what will happen next. It uses these predictions to interpret incoming sensory information. But these predictions are based on prior beliefs about how the world works. A psychedelic relaxes the confidence in these prior beliefs. The brain becomes less certain about its predictions. This allows perceptual hypotheses that would normally be suppressed to become active. Contradictory patterns of activation are not smoothed into a unified interpretation. Instead, they're experienced simultaneously. This creates the impossibility of making sense of the experience through normal logic, and it creates openness to new patterns of meaning. The third mechanism is what researchers call increased entropy in brain dynamics. Under psychedelics, the fractal dimension of brain activity increases. The brain's activity becomes more complex, more chaotic, more unpredictable. This increase in entropy correlates with the intensity of the psychedelic experience. It correlates with ego dissolution. The brain is literally moving toward chaos, toward states that can't be reduced to simple rules or patterns. This increase in entropy is what allows the therapeutic effects. Psychological rigidity, depression, anxiety, trauma involves overly constrained neural patterns. The brain gets stuck in predictable loops. Psychedelics increase entropy. They shake the brain out of its grooves. They allow new patterns to form. They increase neuroplasticity. The brain becomes temporarily more flexible, more capable of reorganization. The fourth mechanism is what we might call the dissolution of executive control. The prefrontal cortex is normally the top-down commander of the brain. It suppresses unwanted thoughts. It enforces goals. It maintains the narrative of self. Under psychedelics, this top-down control is relaxed. The suppression is loosened. Normally inhibited thoughts and perceptions become active. This creates the sense of the mind running wild, of thoughts and visions appearing without conscious control. But this loss of control is also what allows insight. When the executive control is relaxed, alternative patterns of meaning can emerge. Connections can form that the ego would normally suppress. The psychedelic state is fundamentally a state of reduced top-down control. The fifth mechanism is what researchers call the mystical experience. Many psychedelic users report profound spiritual or mystical experiences, a sense of unity with all things, a sense of sacredness, a sense of meaning. These experiences are not hallucinations in the psychiatric sense. They're not false perceptions. They're reorganizations of how meaning is constructed. When the ego is dissolved, the normal way of meaning-making is disrupted and something else emerges, something that feels deeply true, even if it can't be expressed in rational language. Now shift to addiction. The mechanisms are completely different. The sixth mechanism is what researchers call reward circuit hijacking. Addictive drugs activate the brain's reward system with unprecedented intensity. Cocaine causes a massive release of dopamine in the nucleus accumbens. Opioids activate opioid receptors in reward circuits. Methamphetamine disrupts the normal recycling of dopamine. The result is an artificial reward signal orders of magnitude more intense than any natural reward. The brain's reward system evolved to reinforce survival behaviors: eating, sex, social connection. These activities release dopamine. The dopamine signal says, "Do this again. This is important." But addictive drugs produce dopamine signals that far exceed the signals produced by natural rewards. The brain interprets this as, "This is the most important thing that exists. Everything else is subordinate." The seventh mechanism is what we might call the hedonic adaptation trap. The brain adapts to repeated stimulation. After taking a drug several times, the same dose produces less dopamine release. The reward circuits desensitize. This is called tolerance. To get the same reward, the person needs more of the drug, so they increase the dose. The cycle repeats. Tolerance increases. Doses increase. The person is now chasing a high they can never quite reach. This creates a psychological state that researchers call negative reinforcement. The person is no longer taking the drug to feel good. They're taking the drug to avoid feeling bad. When the drug wears off, dopamine plummets. The person experiences withdrawal, depression, anxiety, physical pain. The person takes more drug not to feel pleasure, but to escape the pain of withdrawal. The eighth mechanism is what we might call the competing values trap. In early addiction, the drug use is a choice. The person weighs the rewards of using against the costs. For a period, the reward outweighs the cost, so they use. But addiction is defined by continued use despite harmful consequences. As addiction progresses, the person continues using even though they want to stop, even though it's destroying their life. This happens because the drug becomes the dominant value. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for evaluating competing goals and making decisions aligned with long-term values, becomes impaired by addiction. The system that weighs long-term goals against short-term impulses is dysregulated. The short-term reward of the drug overwhelms the long-term goal of health or relationships or career. The ninth mechanism is what researchers call cue-induced craving. The brain learns associations between environmental cues and drug use: a place, a person, a time of day. After repeated pairings with drug use, these cues alone trigger dopamine release. The person walks into the location where they used to use, and they feel a craving. They haven't taken the drug, but the cue has triggered the reward system. They're now motivated to seek the drug. This cue-induced craving is involuntary. The person can consciously know that they want to quit and still find themselves craving because of environmental cues. The cravings can persist for years after the person stops using. A place, a sound, a smell triggers the dopamine system, triggers the memory of the drug state, triggers the compulsion to seek. The 10th mechanism is what we might call the loss of behavioral flexibility. Addictive drugs cause changes in the striatum. The nucleus accumbens, which is involved in goal-directed behavior, is altered by chronic drug use. The dorsal striatum, which is involved in habitual behavior, becomes overactive. The person transitions from goal-directed drug seeking to habitual drug seeking. The behavior becomes automatic. The person is no longer choosing to use. They're enacting a habit. Brain imaging shows that addicted brains show overactive dorsal striatal activity during drug cues. The person's brain is in habit mode. The behavior has become compiled into automatic routines. This explains why addiction persists even after the person is no longer motivated by the drug's reward. The behavior has become habitual. The 11th mechanism is what researchers call the impaired sense of agency. An addicted person often reports feeling like an observer of their own drug-seeking behavior, like they're watching themselves used despite not wanting to. This is not delusion. This reflects an actual change in brain organization. The prefrontal cortex, which is involved in self-agency and decision-making, is impaired. The person feels alienated from their own behavior because the circuits that normally generate a sense of agency are not functioning normally. The final mechanism is what we might call the neuroplasticity trap. Both psychedelics and addictive drugs increase neuroplasticity. They disrupt the normal patterns of brain connectivity. They open the door to change, but the direction of change depends on the context. Psychedelics increase entropy and neural flexibility in a context of reduced threat. The person is in a safe environment. They're not desperate. The increased plasticity allows new meaning to form, new perspectives to emerge. But addiction occurs in a context of escalating desperation. The drug produces a reward signal so intense that the brain rewires itself around drug seeking. The neuroplasticity is directed towards strengthening the circuits of compulsion. The person's brain reorganizes itself to make addiction the dominant behavioral goal. The psychology of drugs and psychedelic trips reveals something profound. Altered states of consciousness are not inherently therapeutic or destructive. They're tools. They're windows into how the brain constructs reality. They're demonstrations that the self is not fixed, that perception is constructed, that meaning is malleable. But the human brain is built to form habits, to rely on predictions, to maintain homeostasis. When you disrupt these systems through psychedelics in a supportive context, the brain can reorganize around new insights. But when you overwhelm the brain's reward system with drugs, the brain reorganizes around compulsion. The same neuroplasticity that enables healing in one context enables destruction in another.